Let's expand the conversation after learning that Electricity and Energy Minister Dr. Ramokgopa says access to energy and electricity remains a priority during South Africa's G20 presidency. We're joined by Professor Hartmut Winkler, University of Johannesburg's Professor of Physics and commentator on SA Energy. A very good evening to you, Professor. Thank you for your time. I mean, Minister Ramokgopa spoke quite a bit about South Africa and the African continent's reliance on the global north, saying it can no longer be the case. What are some of the dynamics at play?
Yeah, he also quite rightly pointed out that the electrification in Africa is extremely low. He gave certain figures. South Africa itself is not doing too badly in that regard. But if one looks at other countries, it's really just in some of the urban centers or so where you have electricity. We complain about load shedding in this country. It's the norm in a lot of countries. Recently, we had a situation in Zambia, for example, where they literally had load shedding 21 hours a day because their system relies almost entirely on their hydropower, and they had a terrible drought. So as a result, they just couldn't use that. So it's an enormous problem. Also, we have in Africa probably the largest population growth rate in the world. In many countries, very high economic growth rates, and also a lot of urbanization and a growing middle class. All that adds up to increased demand in electricity in the years to come. So while the situation already now is as I said, is quite desperate in some places, this need is going to increase even more.
So how can the shift happen then to determine South Africa and the African continent's energy mix on their own terms? What will it take for that process to begin to shape up?
Yes, well, I think until now, the emphasis has always been on very large projects which cost a lot of money, which take a lot of time to complete, and leave a country in debt. We are, however, moving now into an energy world where a lot of more emphasis being placed on smaller electricity production units. Solar power is expanding more rapidly than any other form of electricity generation in the world at the moment. And in a sense, it's ideal for the situation faced in Africa, where it's going to take a while to build a grid large enough and strong enough to really connect every corner of every country. So in the interim, there's going to be a lot of reliance on the use of these relatively small solar energy generating units, whether it's just one panel in a domestic environment or in front of a shop, or whether it's something slightly bigger, whether it's a solar farm or whether it's just a shopping mall covering its roof in solar panels. It's already happening quite a lot in what's happened in South Africa, and one can see it in some of the other capitals around Africa. And I think that's set to play an ever more important part. If one thinks about when cell phones were first introduced, the initial projections were that they're not going to do well in Africa. People haven't really got the money and so on. Yet they've been proved to be wrong. Cell phone usage grew far more dramatically than anybody expected. I think it's entirely possible that the same thing is going to happen with electricity as well. Yeah. Is that going to be enough to get the continent to where it wants to be? Probably not, but it's a bit difficult at the moment to say exactly what's going to happen in terms of energy technologies in the future and the cost thereof. It's very difficult, and right now, taking a decision that we're going to now build something which is going to be ready in 10 years' time, and which we're going to be using for the next 40 years or so, and which is going to be affordable. It's very tricky. So that's why I also think that rather than, say, building a huge new dam or a huge nuclear power station, as some African countries are considering, I think it's far more likely that they're going to be growing on a much smaller scale, but relatively fast.
I mean, with all these dynamics at play, what impact could the current geopolitical issues have on conversations around renewables, and more so considering the US's withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement?
Yes, well, that's certainly set a cat amongst the pigeon worldwide. The US being one of the countries which was committing funds towards the just energy transition, I'm pretty sure that money is not going to materialize. We do have a new global Cold War starting, where exactly who's on which side is not clearly defined, but there's clearly a lot of the more developed countries now looking for support around the world, and that might in turn play in favor of South Africa and African countries. It might be easier, especially from countries like China, for example. China is in any case already very active in Africa, trying to develop energy technology. They're building solar plants in Botswana right now, in Zambia, even in South Africa. Other countries are Russia, for example, is hoping to promote nuclear plants a lot, although they've been doing that for quite a while. So there are certainly countries around that would probably be happy to invest, partly because of geopolitical reasons. I think in China's case, it's also what they've done in their country is absolutely incredible, the way they've expanded their electricity infrastructure and electricity generating capacity. Now, they can't carry on doing this forever, yet they've got all the factories and building this. So they are going to be looking for markets very soon. They already are. So I think that's one of the things we're facing. Yes, it's difficult to say exactly what's happening, but as I say, I don't think we can put too much hope on the United States offering any assistance for a couple of years at least. But other countries might be more forthcoming.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for weighing in on this discussion this evening, rounding up that conversation with University of Johannesburg's Professor of Physics and commentator on South African energy, Professor Hartmut Winkler.